Welcome back, Deep Review TV viewers. It's Chris Nichols here. We're coming to you from lovely Kananaskis country, and today we're looking at a very early pre-production model of the Sigma FPL. Now, we never actually got a chance to look at the original Sigma FP, but it was designed to be an ultra-compact body with lots of attachment points, great for floating on gimbals or putting into rigs. You know, it had a heat-dissipating body, and it was very much a video-centric camera. We have the Sigma FPL now, and Sigma has told us that this is actually very much a photocentric camera. It has at its heart a 60 megapixel full frame sensor, but it still has the same body as the Sigma FP. So is that gonna work, a video style body that's made more for photography? It's just one big puddle shot. I get it. It's icy. Oh yeah, very icy. So I'm going to talk about handling on this camera next, and honestly it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of things I don't love about using this camera. However, this is the world's smallest compact full frame camera. Unfortunately though, I do feel like the EVF, although bulky, is pretty much essential when it comes to photography on this camera. I really like having it because the back panel, although an excellent, well over 2 million dot 3.2 inch back panel with touchscreen interface, doesn't rotate at all. And I mean, I'm doing a lot of landscapes out here, a lot of tripod work, and I really like having the ability to shoot waist level or get low to the ground for low angles, and I'm largely then going to depend on having an EVF that can do this. Now the EVF unit, as far as the balance of the camera goes, it is actually really nice to use, but it does pull the camera down on the left side. It puts a lot of weight over here. I love that it keeps my eye nice and far away from the camera, but holding the grip, I feel like this constantly wants to fall to the left. I feel like it's slipping and I have to really clamp on to make sure it's safe. And I'm using a relatively lightweight 20 to 60. If I put a 24 to 70 or 70 to 200 lens on here, it really is unbalanced. Now, being an ultra compact body, we don't have a lot of space for dials and buttons. I do like that we have a separate selector for cine or still mode. That's nice. And we've got our mode button down here in an odd place if I want to change from aperture priority, shutter priority, and so on and so forth. I've got two dials here. The front dial I actually find really nice. It's large and it's easy to use, and that's good because you have to depend on it. The back dial though is too soft to push. I'm using it a lot, rotating it to do exposure comp, but I'm constantly hitting my focus button or my focusing mode, and that's getting a little annoying. Now lastly, I want to talk about the quick select menu. It's something you're going to depend on quite a bit. It is in a good place. I'm not having a problem hitting that one, so I can bring it up, and it is actually very clear to see, and it is customizable. However, the interface is a little bit janky because there's no touchscreen interface. That seems strange. So I've got to hit the quick menu, then I go to my joypad, select what I want to edit, then use my front dial and I can change it. With practice, it's not too bad, but if I was shooting street photography or action or something, it's just going to slow me way down. Now, I do want to talk about the EVF. Now, it's not necessarily specific to the FPL, but it's being released at the same time as the FPL. And this will actually work on the Sigma FP with a firmware update. Now, the FP had an optical loop that you could get. This, of course, takes it to the next level, having an EVF. It's 3.69 million dots, not bad. It does take a little bit of finagling to attach onto the camera. This is pre-production, so it was a little bit trickier. They say that that was to be expected, but it does have some interesting features. So you can flip up the EVF up to 90 degrees. Some people are going to like that. 1/4 inch screw on the side so you can add attachments. Now the camera itself does not come with a 3.5mm headphone jack, but there is one provided when you have the EVF attachment. There's also an SSD out so you can record to an external SSD, but unfortunately there's no HDMI pass-through. And what that means is that if I've got this EVF unit attached, I can't do ProRes RAW or B-RAW out of the camera with the EVF on to an external recorder. That's unfortunate. Now, the only other thing I'm going to say about this, there is no auto sensor to switch between LCD and EVF. And until you're missing that, you don't really realize how much you desperately want it. I'm constantly flicking back and forth here. It's just a lot of clicking, and yeah, it's kind of annoying. Now, at the heart of the camera, we have a 60 megapixel sensor We can't say who makes it or where it comes from, but it is certainly going to draw comparisons to the Sony a7R IV. It does seem to have very good dynamic range and detail from what I've seen, but I really want to have a final version of this camera before we really evaluate the images, but you guys will be able to see some samples. What I will say about this is it really reminds me of the classic Sigma DP1s, DP2s, you know, the Quattros, where you had a camera that had kind of a quirky, compact body, you know, left some stuff to be desired when it came to ergonomics. Holding this Quattro in my hand is like gripping onto a sea urchin tightly. That being said, you know, those cameras had foveon sensors. It was something unique, whereas here we're back to a classic Bayer type sensor. So although very high quality, it doesn't really have that same uniqueness. So why would I then put up with the ergonomic difficulties of this camera? So my main issue with the Sigma FPL is that we've got a body that was designed for video-centric situations, and all that Sigma's done is just stuffed a high-resolution sensor into that body and said, here you go, photographers, but it just doesn't make sense. I mean, the FP was very compact, so compact that you couldn't fit an IBIS unit. I get it, but it also only had an electronic shutter. Now for video applications, that's fine, but for photography, you really want to have the option for mechanical shutter because we do get some rolling shutter on this sensor. I mean, you can see some examples here where I can't pan with the subject properly. You know, I can't really move the camera around in an aggressive way, and if something was moving through the frame side to side, again, it's going to go diagonal. It basically relegates this camera to still life, non-moving subjects. All right, now we're going to talk about autofocus on the Sigma FPL next because there's some interesting stuff here, but first, I need to remind you guys that this is, again, a totally pre-production camera. None of this is final, so we can't really talk too much about it. This is what I will say. First off, what is really unique here, this is the first L-mount camera that now has hybrid phase and contrast detect autofocus. We did do some testing here with continuous autofocus. I mean, the tracking was losing its position. Jordan tried doing some shots in low light of action and sports and a skate park, and again, it didn't work super well. But again, this is not final. We do find that the autofocus single point is quite quick, seems very accurate, and for what I'm doing today, or I'm shooting mostly on a tripod doing landscapes, no problem there. But again, even though this is pre-production, I'm skeptical that it would ever be fully capable of doing high-end action in sports. So I think you guys are gathering I have some issues with this camera, and it is quirky as all Sigma bodies seem to be. Where's a positive use case for this in photography? It would be like what we're doing today, getting out into the mountains, shooting landscapes on a tripod, taking our time, no rush, no movement, no action. That's where the ergonomics of this camera aren't going to hold you back. That's where the compact nature of this body is nice, although albeit a little awkward to carry around. But I do still have issues like battery life. It's not great here. We can't give you guys exact numbers, but I've shot about 60 photos today. It's not very cold, and I'm already at half battery life on here. So for the price of this camera, why not just go Sony a7R IV? I mean, you've got very similar sensor, very similar image quality, but a camera with way better battery life, rugged design, lots of customizable buttons, great autofocus, more versatile, so on and so forth. I think you get what I'm trying to say. So for photography, although it's interesting and quirky like almost all Sigma bodies are, I have a hard time recommending it. But let's go to Jordan and talk about video because maybe it'll do better as a hybrid shooter.
Hey everyone, it's Jordan here to talk about the Sigma FPL for video, and that's actually the camera that's filming me right now. We're just doing internal H.264 recording, so you can see the quality of that. And one of the things that camera manufacturers are really struggling with right now is photographers want more and more resolution, but for video, we're still looking at 4K, which is 8 megapixels primarily. Even 8K is just over 40 megapixels. So when we see cameras higher than that, it becomes a real issue of how are we going to downsample that image. We've got something like the Canon R5, which actually uses oversampled 8K image to create a beautiful 4K image, but we all know about the overheating. And a lot of other high-resolution cameras, they just have really ugly-looking 4K video from line skipping or binning or whatever they're doing. So let's take a look at how the FPL video compares. So doing the internal H.264 recording, you've got two options, IPB or all-I compression on it. And I was actually quite impressed with the quality coming off of this. I suspect this may be using the same sensor as the Sony a7R IV, but you can see when we compare those two on the studio scene that the FPL is actually quite a bit sharper and more detailed. However, when we compare it to the oversampled 8K down to 4K from the Canon R5, that is still kind of the gold standard for this sort of thing. The other thing I was very curious about is rolling shutter, because it's pretty bad in stills mode, but it is quite a bit better when you're in video mode, very similar to what it is in stills in its 12-bit recording mode there. So quality is quite good on this. The problem is there's no way for you to get a really wide dynamic range. There's no log recording on this profile. We're using neutral right now, and you can see it's still very contrasty. So one of the things that makes the FPL very exciting is it does give you the option to record internal, uncompressed cinema DNG. Now, these are absolutely huge file sizes, but it does give you a lot of freedom to move the white balance in post. The real downside, however, to this is it's only 8-bit. So you can push those shadows quite a bit more than the H.264. There is more dynamic range there, but you definitely like hit a wall where you just can't bring those shadows up. You get tons of color noise and it looks absolutely terrible. But what's really interesting about this camera as well is if you take the electronic viewfinder off so you can access your micro HDMI port, then you can output to either an Atomos Ninja 5 and record ProRes RAW, or a Blackmagic recorder, and then you can get B-RAW recording. So let's take a look at those next. Now here's where things get really confusing, because when we jump over to external recording, we're now getting 12-bit RAW video off of this. And again, remember this is a pre-production camera, but when I looked at the image there, suddenly all the detail went completely out the window. It really looks like a line-skipped image out of this. So yes, we got more dynamic range and smaller file sizes than Cinema DNG, but the image itself doesn't look very good. So it doesn't really make this the most useful of the recording modes, and that is a real disadvantage. One more record option is available if you plug an external SSD into the camera. That's going to let you record Cinema DNG in 10 and 12-bit modes, but there's some real weirdness going on there. If you set it to the 10-bit mode, you're going to get a nice detailed image, although you will get quite a bit of rolling shutter. Or you can use the 12-bit recording, which is unfortunately line skipped, so we're back to a not very detailed image with tons of moire on it. I do think the 10-bit Cinema DNG is a good choice, but the file sizes are absolutely enormous. Okay, the rest of this video has been shot manual focus, but we're going to roll the dice and we are going to try continuous autofocus mode in video. Remember, this is the first L-mount camera that's offering phase detect as well. Now, I should specify while we're testing this that this is one thing Sigma has said is very early pre-production and will be improved in the final version. But one thing I was really excited to see is we don't have a lot of that wobble, those jitters that we're used to seeing with some of the other Panasonic and Leica and the previous Sigma camera. So that phase detect system definitely is working. The problem is it's just totally inconsistent. I can't predict when it's just going to completely lose me and wander off. Even walking towards the camera like you can see here, sometimes it does a good job, but sometimes it just drifts completely. So it's not 100% trustworthy, and because I don't have a fully articulating screen, you just kind of have to hope with this. But again, this could be something that'll really improve when the final production model ships. Some things I'm always delighted to see on a camera are included here. We can set our shutter speed with shutter angle so it's consistent no matter what frame rate we choose. As well, we've got waveforms. You can have a small or a large one on screen, and I far prefer those to histograms. One really cool thing about the FP and the FPL that I don't think enough people are talking about is something called the director's viewfinder. Now, you always see in behind-the-scenes images from movies, the director looking very pretentious, looking through a little optical eyepiece, framing up the next shot. And when we're using digital now, you don't really want to drag over a giant cinema camera, put the lens on to see what the shot looks like. So I actually really love this. They have preloaded profiles for ARRI and RED and the Sony Venice. You just choose the profile there, mount the lens, and it'll show you what that field of view is going to look like on those different cinema cameras. It's a really cool tool, and those are extremely expensive eyepieces, so that could almost justify the price of this camera if you use that feature. So at the end of everything, I'm just having a really tough time finding a use case for this camera. They have a super high resolution sensor that would be great for photography, but the rolling shutter issues mean you can only use it in a few very small situations like landscape or available light portraits like we shot in the sample gallery. And if you're really just looking for a video camera and you don't absolutely need internal RAW recording, you could get a Panasonic S5 and an Atomos Ninja 5 for pretty close to the same price as this, and then you're able to record 5.9K ProRes RAW with an absolutely beautiful image. So it's a bit of a tough sell. I'm very curious what we're going to see with the final production version, how many of these issues might be fixed and what'll change. I'm very curious to see that in the future. So you probably want to subscribe to the channel. But don't forget as well, you can also go check out dpreview.com. There's a link in the description below. Take a look at full resolution sample images that Chris shot. Make sure that you subscribe. That would really help us out. And we'll see you all again with more DP Review TV soon.